President Eric Garcetti. To my left, Mr. City Attorney, we have a quorum, so we can get started. At this point in time, I'd like to deal with items that we have on the consent calendar, and so that'll be items 1 through 9. So, Ms. Barclay, if you could read item 1.
Meg Barclay, CLA. Item 1 is communication from the mayor relative to the 35th program year of the Housing Community Development Consolidated Plan.
Okay. Then item 1 will receive and file the communication from the mayor. Item 2.
Item 2 is a report from the Community Redevelopment Agency relative to the first quarter status of fiscal year 2008-2009 AB 1290 funds.
Okay, we'll receive and file the CRA report on item 2. Item 3.
Item 3 is a CRA report relative to amending the contract with SMWN to contract with the successor agency Perkins and Will.
Okay, on item 3, we'll adopt the CRA report. We've just been joined by Council Member Jan Perry. Ms. Barclay, item 4, we will continue for 1 week. That brings us to we will just continue. That brings us to item 5.
Item 5 is a report from the CRA and the CAO and resolutions relative to the execution of an acquisition loan agreement with Affirmed Housing Group.
Okay, then on item 5, we'll adopt the CAO report. Item 6.
Item 6 is a report from the CRA relative to the status of the Land Acquisition Fund.
Okay, on item 6, we'll receive and file the CRA report. Brings us to item 7.
Item 7 is a report from the CRA and the CLA relative to a memorandum of understanding with the City and the Harbor Department for collaboration on a request for qualifications for development project at the Caltrans site located at 537 Beacon Street.
Okay, so on that item, we'll adopt the CLA report. Item 8.
Item 8 is a report from the CRA and the CLA relative to the acquisition of real property located at 1300 East 1st Street and and a related CRA budget amendment.
Okay, then on item 8, we'll adopt the CLA report. That brings us to item 9.
Item 9 is a report from the CRA and the CAO relative to the acquisition of real property located at 3900 through 3914 West Jefferson Boulevard.
Okay, then on item 9, we'll adopt the CAO report. So at this point in time, do I have a time restriction?
You're good, sir.
I'm good? Okay, so let's go to the special agenda. On the special agenda, we have 4 items, 3 of which are on consent, I believe. And that, Ms. Barclay, will start off with special agenda item 11.
Item 11 is a motion Wesson Zine relative to funding the ongoing school safety program and community-related activities provided by Community Build Incorporated.
Okay, Mr. City Clerk, what do you think we do with this?
Approved, sir.
Why would we do that?
Sir, you're the maker of the motion.
I just wanted to hear you say that. Okay, so item 11 will adopt the motion. That brings us to special agenda item 12. In fact, on that item, we'll continue that item, bringing us to special agenda item 13.
Item 13 is a CRA report and a CLA report relative to the creation of a Schaefer Fire Victims Assistance Program.
Okay, item 13, then we'll adopt the CLA report. And I think what we'll do, we should take item 14. We'll take item 14 up now. So if you could read special agenda item 14.
Item 14 is a report from the city attorney and an ordinance relative to regulating the grounds for the eviction of tenants from foreclosed residential rental properties.
Okay, thank you. Now, before we bring up the individuals from the various departments, we do have cards from the public. So I want to start off with Mr. Gross and then Don Jones. I think it's Don Jones. Larry, good morning.
Good morning. I got a minute?
You, well,
90 seconds.
We'll be flexible.
Okay.
Go.
All right. Larry Gross, Coalition for Economic Survival. We fully support the ordinance to protect tenants in foreclosed rental properties. We've seen an explosion of foreclosures at our tenants' rights clinic and doing our REAP tenant outreach. Tenants are the overlooked victims here. Plus, there's a lot of confusion on what their rights are. Banks don't want to be landlords. They avoid collecting the rents, and they hire these unethical lawyers who try and get them out through illegal means until they're caught. This ordinance clears that confusion up by setting one rule for all. And it's time we think outside the box, and we thank you, Councilmember Garcetti, for doing that. Our dire economic situation demands bold actions. It's why people voted for change in November. It's why those workers in Chicago took over their plant. We can't continue down this road of business as usual, or we'll see LA tenants acting like they're workers in Chicago and take over LA buildings. This ordinance provides a little bit of hope and justice. We urge you to support this, and we don't want any sunset. This situation isn't going to go away in 6 months.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. What'd you do, Larry? You brought your whole family with you? Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones. Please, quiet, please. Mr. Jones, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Weston. Good morning, council members. My name is Don Jones. I'm the founder and organizer of the California Renters Organizing Committee. This is a real eviction notice. Each year, between 60,000 and 70,000 households in Los Angeles County receive one and are evicted. The number is certain to grow in these rapidly tougher times. Private attorneys assist approximately 1,300 via free legal services. 3,000 are helped by low-cost sliding scale fee services and private attorneys, and some are assisted by low-cost attorneys. Most go unrepresented. However, less than 1% of those that go to court alone win. What happens to the 98% of others that are not able to prevail? They lose their homes, have an eviction notice on their record, records that are accessible to prospective landlords and cloud their opportunities for further homes. They are forced to pay back rent, and in most cases face a higher rent the next time. They're forced to scramble, change their paper trails, and change the schools of their children. What about legal aid, you might ask? LAFLA only represents in downtown court, and the prospective client must be in the country legally and low income. There are often remedies available but are inaccessible because of language barriers and a convoluted code section deficient.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Thank you.
Even the terms...
Mr. Jones, thank you.
Just one last thing. I know that this is a real eviction notice.
One last thing. Go on.
I know this is a real eviction notice because my name is on it. So I'm not speaking from some theoretical perspective. I'm speaking from a person that's truly affected by this. And in that context, I support Mr. Garcetti's legislation. Thank you so much for your courtesy.
Betsy Handler and Lee Simon Weisberg. Leah. I'm sorry. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Betsy Handler. I'm the Director of Legal Services at Inner City Law Center. And we most heartily support this ordinance. We are seeing an enormous increase in foreclosures, people coming to us for help both in rent-controlled properties and non-rent-controlled properties. Right now, there's nothing we can do for the non-rent-controlled tenants. I will say that even though rent-controlled properties are supposed to be protected, we see certain banks and certain lawyers continuously attempting to evict tenants. There are, however, some other, good as this ordinance is, there are other things that need to be considered that we see as serious problems. Typically, you see service in the name of the landlord only. The tenants don't even know that there's a foreclosure. They don't know that they're being told they have to leave, which of course they don't in rent control. We need some sort of a registration program with the housing department. Tenants don't know who to send the rent to, and the other serious problem is that utilities are often shut off because the bill was in the name of the previous landlord, and the current tenants, in order to change the registration, would have to put down $500, which they don't have, and sometimes we've had to intervene at the last minute to get bills paid.
Thank you, Ms. Handler.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Leah Simon Weisberg. I'm the co-executive director of Eviction Defense Network, and for the past 6 months, about 100% of my time has been focusing on helping tenants who are facing foreclosure. I believe that the numbers of foreclosures are only going to increase. I've been watching very closely, particularly the numbers downtown, and we were seeing, around 20% were foreclosures. Last Friday, 11 of the 35 were foreclosures, and that's downtown. That's not looking at the non-rent. That's an area that I think we're all very concerned about. And to reiterate the concerns of the 2 additional requirements that we need, which is the registration, because when tenants are coming in, whether they're going to be non-rent controlled or rent controlled, we don't know who to contact, and so tenants don't know how to pay rent, and if now they still can be evicted for non-payment, we need that mechanism. I also just want to applaud that it's going to be including the same protections around relocation and the illegal units, because that's another thing we're facing, where a lot of tenants suddenly find out they're in an illegal unit and the banks just tell them to leave.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Tanya Cardoso and Veronica Perez-Becker. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Tanya Cardoso. I'm an attorney with Kimball, Tyree, and St. John. I am speaking in opposition of the current motion. Basically, this issue is tantamount to a taking. You are basically thwarting property owners from doing what they like with their own property. Furthermore, this motion is basically discrimination in that you are treating banks differently from other property owners who are similarly situated. Banks are already financially strapped. Not allowing them to sell properties quickly will create a larger loss than they already have and will only make their financial future that much bleaker. Banks are not in a position to be acting as property managers. As you've heard other people say, the tenants will not know where to pay rent. They will not know who to ask for help. Banks are not able to be giving this kind of, they are not prepared to be helping tenants as they can, as a normal property manager can. Tenants in non-rent control properties do not have their rents artificially reduced, such as those units subject to the rent control. Therefore, it will be easy for them to find alternate housing at comparable prices. Our research suggests that banks are over 70% less likely to sell a home that is occupied, thus making their loss due to foreclosure exponentially greater. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, Veronica Perez-Becker with the Central City Association. We certainly understand and appreciate the problem that you are trying to address here. And we support making this a temporary measure. We support coming back after 6 months and taking a look at whether the economic environment has changed, how this has impacted a bank's ability to sell properties. And we do hope that you do acknowledge that this will make it more difficult for banks to get in there to renovate and clean up properties and turn them around. But we do appreciate the urgency of the situation. So if we can come back in 6 months, and in the meantime, see if there is anything that can be done to mitigate the difficulty that banks will have in cleaning up and selling these properties, because ultimately that's what's going to bring our property values back up. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Brian Paul and Alfredo Vidal. Okay. Let's try Rich. Where are you? Otterstrom.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah. So this is our musical interlude. Did he leave? All right, everybody give him a round of applause. Our musician is...
Forgot that again. Hi, Rick Otterstrom, Realtor.
The realtors would like to see somebody like the great city of Los Angeles convince the bank to sell their REOs. We've been after them for years to do that. But this ordinance does not pass the smell test for rent control, from what we see. The Section 4994, the Rent Adjustment Commission of the City of Los Angeles shall have the authority to adopt policies, rules, and regulations to effectuate the purpose of this article and to implement, administer, and enforce provisions of this article. The Rent Adjustment Commission of the City of Los Angeles controls the pricing and rent increases for RSO units. That is the rent control. That is rent control. Placing single-family homes under rent control is illegal in California. So if you do not intend to use this as rent control, this ordinance is rent control, I would suggest you add to it, send it back to the city attorney and add to it, this ordinance is not intended to and never will be used for rent regulation.
Okay, Rick.
Am I off? One? Gone.
Hey, I tell you, good job. Again, do we have Brian, Paul? Where were you the last time? Were you outside too, playing music? Anyway, good to see you.
Thank you. Yes, Southern Regional Association of Realtors have a couple of concerns with this admirable response to the plight of the rental community and the residents of Los Angeles. We're concerned about the maintenance and the paying of the utilities on these properties, how that will be taken care of. The ability to then go ahead and sell those foreclosed properties. Often it's difficult for the banks to get in there and fix them up and deliver them in a saleable manner. So there are those concerns. And also in the future, we're concerned that maybe banks will look at Los Angeles and people that buy property in Los Angeles in a different way. Maybe they will look at Los Angeles and say, well, because of these sorts of restrictions, maybe they will put restrictions, and we hope not, but maybe they might consider putting restrictions on the types of loans they provide to the residents of Los Angeles to prevent this in the future, to prevent the rental. And this, again, would impact the renting residents of the city.
Thank you. Thank you. Alfredo Vidal? Oh, so now we have somebody else, huh? Yeah, I just want to see who it is. Everybody point. I heard him back there. I have a good ears. Okay. Estella Studio.
We usually do.
Buenos días, mi nombre es Estela Astudillo.
Good morning, my name is Estela Astudillo.
Soy miembro de ECO por 6 años.
I've been a member of Acorn for 6 years.
Yo he rentado la misma casa por 11 años.
I've rented the same home for 11 years.
Allí vivo con mis hijos y mis nietos.
I live there with my children and my grandchildren.
Este año me enteré que el dueño de la propiedad la perdió en un embargo.
This year I found out that the owner of the property lost it in a foreclosure.
Después el banco me dijo que yo también me tenía que ir.
And then the bank told me that I too had to leave.
Como soy miembro de ECOR, vine a conseguir ayuda legal.
Because I am a member of Acorn, I sought them out for legal help.
Me enteré que no tenía que irme porque vivo en un edificio que está bajo control de renta.
I found out that I didn't have to leave because I am living under rent control.
Si no fuera por Acor, yo ya también hubiera perdido mi hogar.
If it weren't for Acorn, I too would have lost my home.
Ahora pago mi renta a los hermanos Lehman
Now I pay my rent to the Lehman Brothers
porque no han vendido la casa.
because they have not yet sold the house.
Yo creo que no hay muchas personas en esta situación en Los Ángeles. Gracias. Yo creo que hay muchas personas en esta situación en Los Ángeles.
I believe that there are many people in this situation in Los Angeles.
Thank you. Thank you. Bill Preselucky. And again, do we have Alfredo? Are you here, Vidal? Good morning.
Hi, Bill Przlecki, representing People Organized for West Side Renewal, Power. We're just here to say that as a group that has experienced what happens in a community when we lose lower-income renters, we know that this motion to protect renters who have been paying their rent and doing everything right, who have nothing to do with this foreclosure crisis, and in fact, are not even in the mainstream discussion about this. They need the protections here, just like all the lower-income renters in Los Angeles. In the housing crisis that we're in, especially during an economic downturn, we do not need more folks put out into this market that people cannot afford. We need fewer people. We need more homes for more lower-income people. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. President, how would you like to proceed from this point?
Can we bring the city attorney forward and housing department? Do you mind if I make a couple comments?
No.
Okay. As they're coming forward, I can't bite my tongue at this exact moment before you all give your testimony. First of all, thank you to everybody who is here this morning, and thank you for that testimony. And thank you for the hard work in the city attorney's office of turning this around in a very quick time. Because people out there right now are asking, what is government doing about the housing crisis now? Not a 6-month study, not a year from now, not 2 years from now. I was in Washington, D.C. yesterday, and I bought the Washington Post as I was shivering in 20-degree weather. And on the front page, foreclosure epidemic infecting rental market. And it told the story of dozens of people in Washington, which represents thousands in D.C. and millions around the country, who right now are truly the innocent victims of what is happening. There were a couple things that were said, which is why I can't bite my tongue at the beginning, but then I have some questions when we'll get there, that we have banks who were not able to meet their financial obligations. In essence, they didn't pay their rents on time. We have mortgage companies who weren't able to meet their obligations, and in some cases went under. And so for the logic of some to say suddenly tenants who have been paying their rent and who in just as difficult economic times not only have not just been paying their rent, but when you look at those banks that didn't meet those obligations, they're getting bailed out by our tax dollars right now. And if we're going to, in government, say that we are a just government that is actually a democracy from the people and for the people, I think our focus needs to be in this extraordinary moment. I appreciate some of the arguments that were made, and I think we built this in a way that is very conscious of those. But to right now be making arguments that this cannot be done because there are already those protections out there, where are you living right now? What country are you in, and what are you seeing? And I don't want anybody to clap. I appreciate it, but I'm serious about this, and I don't usually speak this way in this committee. But I'm very fired up about this because for all of us on this committee, we're the front line. We see the human face. I mean, when Estella came up here and spoke, that's the human face of this problem. This isn't an abstract issue. We have to be conscious of market forces. We have to be conscious of government policy, and we have been. But we cannot be unconscious of the human element that is in this. Now, a couple things had been said in this committee leading up to this. One of the extraordinary bright spots, or not, I mean extraordinary, one of the few bright spots in real estate was the management of these properties, that actually realtors and others have come to us and said, thank you, this is one of the few places we do see some action and activity. Now, a bank's quick sale, when they're getting assistance right now, is exactly what this is trying to accommodate. You cannot sell something quickly that is blighted. You cannot sell something quickly when you have evicted people and brought down an entire neighborhood. And so when you're looking at trying to stabilize, we'd love many of these banks who are not in property management to get out of property management. We know that. But tenants will not be the victims of that in the meantime. To say, oh, well, we kicked everybody out and made a quicker sale so that now those folks are entering a very difficult rental market, We've seen some softening of it, but it is still the largest gap in America between income and rental prices. Number one, higher than San Francisco, higher than New York. It is the least affordable city. So let's have a little bit of humanity here. I want to go into a few questions, and I think that I want to address one comment that was made as well about pricing and rent increases. The quote that our friend Richard had from the rent control ordinance is exactly right. That was the quote, pricing and rent increases. This does not deal with pricing and rent increases, which is why opposition, if there is any left out there, is so befuddling to me. This actually helps the bank get their money while they're figuring out what to do. When they evict somebody, they don't get that money. And trust me, they need it. And I will say on the record, and the city attorney can maybe lay this out, but I don't think we need to restate what this is very clearly stating, which is that this is not about pricing and rent increases. It's not intended to be used for rent control in any way. Is that correct? And does that...
That's correct. The RAC not only regulates rents, it also regulates the grounds for eviction, and we just wanted to make it clear that those RAC regulations pertaining to the grounds for eviction will apply to people covered by this ordinance. This is not a rent control ordinance. State law would prohibit us from regulating rents in single-family homes and newly constructed apartments, and I personally don't believe there's any need to repeat that in the ordinance.
Absolutely. Which is why I also appreciate some testimony from the business community that let's do this. This is an extraordinary time. The banks that we talked to, we really appreciate those conversations that we've had as well. We know what's happened with rent-stabilized properties. The story of Cynthia Spears in CD8, Johnny Lee in my own district. I mean, we can multiply that in each one of our districts, but those people who are illegally evicted under rent control. But those that are not, we need to keep our neighborhoods stable. In terms of the cost for us as policymakers, even if we're dispassionate about the human issue, the cost to us in rising crime, the cost to us in blocks and neighborhoods, and the blight that we have worked decades, especially in all the districts in this committee, to address would be an extraordinary step backwards. So a couple of questions. For Tina Hess, what are the neighborhood impacts of vacant properties that you're seeing as a result of foreclosures, so we can establish those findings? I think we know, but why don't you tell us a little bit?
Well, I think that the foreclosure crisis has certainly led to the proliferation of vacant buildings in many of our neighborhoods. Banks typically are very slow to respond to the requirements of the municipal code in terms of complying with orders from building and safety, barricading, cleaning, and fencing these properties. Not only does it impose a burden on the communities, the neighborhoods where these properties exist, it also imposes an additional burden on the Department of Building and Safety in that they are often required or mandated to go in and barricade, clean, and fence these properties to keep the nuisance activities from proliferating at the properties. I think that these buildings, in addition to having perhaps leading to decline in property values, also require an increased police response for criminal and nuisance activities at the properties.
For either the city attorneys and the housing department as well, how many of the vacant properties that we're seeing are a result of eviction of a tenant or tenant evictions? Do we know? Do we have that quantified?
Good morning, Hakim Mordezai, Housing Department. The Housing Department does not track evictions unless they are done, on rent-stabilized properties, unless they're done pursuant to a landlord declaration. And since it's illegal to evict someone for foreclosure, these are occurring outside of the law. And so what we do have are those tenants who have come forward to us with complaints. We have about 400 cases that have been filed with our investigations unit, and we've received approximately 300 phone calls on our hotline for inquiries related to this topic.
And I always, as good a job as the housing department does, and many of our city agencies, I always say that we probably receive less than a tenth of any problem that goes out there. So I think that probably represents thousands of cases. Judy Reel, how does this ordinance distinguish between properties that are owned by banks and those that are owned by landlords?
Well,
or does it?
This ordinance distinguishes between properties that are owned by banks and other lenders, and those that are subsequently purchased or owned by individuals. A bank that is subject to this ordinance that acquires property or title via foreclosure becomes a landlord. But it will only apply to the banks or the lending agencies that foreclose the property in satisfaction of a defaulted obligation. If they subsequently sell it to somebody, then the regulations in this ordinance would not apply to them. They would be treated, the subsequent purchaser, just like any other property owner in the city of LA.
So folks that are worried about that turnaround and whether it affect them, that's the point. We want to get it into good people's hands who know how to actually take care of a property.
Correct, and they'd be treated just as any other homeowner or property owner in the city of LA.
Okay. So the same eviction rules would not become effective if a bank sells a property to a new landlord if
Correct.
it's an individual, as long as it's not to another bank or lending
As long as it's not to an agent,
defaulted.
you know, as long as they're not just selling their paper.
Okay.
Yes.
Are banks currently required to notice tenants of RSO properties when they take over a property? And would
my-
this ordinance require banks to do the same?
No, my understanding is that they are not required under the RSO to notify tenants, and this ordinance does not impose any additional obligations in that respect.
A couple other questions for Housing Department. How would this ordinance fit into an overall foreclosure strategy? I mean, I think Los Angeles has been at the forefront of trying to respond with the tools that we have, but I know you're putting an overall foreclosure strategy together, and, you know, where does this piece fit in with the other ones?
Thank you, Mercedes Marquez. You all know that I have been spending a significant amount of time in Washington, D.C. myself, working on what a national response should be. I'm one of a handful of practitioners that goes in to speak with kind of think tanks and policymakers in Washington about what we're going to do. What I can tell you we're seeing across the country and what we're seeing here is that as foreclosures increase, our third quarter data for this year is in. We have gone from 12,923 foreclosures through the second quarter of the year. We've now topped 18,000. We're doing the maps for you now in the same way that we've done the maps for you quarter after quarter, and you will receive them within 2 weeks. What I can tell you about that is that for the first time, we're now seeing a trend where the trend is that there are more multifamily properties beginning to go into foreclosure than single-family properties. As it was before, through the second quarter, we already had approximately a third of those that were foreclosed are multifamily properties. So now that gap is closing a little bit, and the trend in this quarter is that it's more multifamily than single-family homes. All right. We're also seeing the continued geographic trend that the vast, vast majority of the multifamily properties are in South Los Angeles. Through the second quarter of this year, 96% of the multifamily properties in foreclosure were under the rent stabilization ordinance. Right? So we're doing everything we can to protect them. You already know. I won't go through all the things that we've done in the department to get the word out. But what we also know is that as we're getting closer to the new census, the latest report from the census, the folks to get ready for the next one, give the next information, is that 22% of the single-family homes in the city of Los Angeles are rented. So that leaves now a very large pool of homes. As we go forward with our efforts on foreclosure, there is not anywhere near, as you know, enough money, even with the $33 million that is the first amount to come into the city, which should arrive in February, to cover this level of problem. We will propose to you that at least 1/3 of the money that comes in be used to do a scattered site rental, purchase, and rehab program to keep those rents affordable scattered throughout South Los Angeles. We've had this discussion. That's about 1/3, so that's a little over $10 million, right? I'm hoping that gets us to 100 units, right, bought among fourplexes and rehab. That's how expensive it is, even with lower prices. As a result of that, sir, what I believe we absolutely have to do is everything possible to, one, keep people in their homes, whether they rent those homes or they own those homes, their families and their homes. And what we know from the research across the country is that the most important way to stabilize a neighborhood and keep it safe is to keep people living in the buildings who care about them. And there is nothing to suggest that a family like the one that testified earlier that has lived in that apartment and taken care of it for 11 years cares about it or loves it any less than someone who owns it. And so from our point of view, as a strategy, we must keep people in. What we are seeing now is that for every empty building, the value of the buildings next to it drop dramatically, right? So this is about a widespread stabilization effort to keep people in, keep eyes on the street, and spend our money in stabilizing rather than in spending it on more police or in boarding up properties. And that's how it fits in.
There was an argument, legal argument made that this was a taking. This, if done right, would actually continue to keep tenants in and have a higher amount of income going to whoever holds these properties. So I won't make a financial argument that I think is very clear. Can you, just for the record, lay out as to why this is not?
Well, this is expressly authorized by state law. You're not taking property. The owner is entitled actually to vacate the property under the Ellis Act. They still have full use of the property, just as any other rental property under the RSO. If I might, the other legal objection that I heard voiced was that this isn't, it's not fair, it's illegal to treat these sorts of owners differently. But this is an economic regulation. It's subject to a rational basis test, and I believe it will be upheld if there's a rational basis, a plausible reason to impose eviction controls in properties that are foreclosed. And I believe the testimony by Ms. Hess, as well as others who have spoken, have demonstrated that lenders and banks who acquire title via foreclosure treat their properties in sort of a unique way. They're much more willing to simply let them stay vacant, which is causing a serious problem in the city of LA, and I believe that would provide ample justification for the legislation.
Okay. The last point I'll just, or last thanks, is to reiterate to the City Attorney's Office and the Housing Department how quickly you worked on this. It shows that you have a sense of the urgency and the feeling for the folks that are out here in Los Angeles right now. And not only was it great legal and analytical work, but it was in a timely enough manner that we can actually get this out there and rolling. And I want to thank also Sarah Dussault and Sam Siegel from my staff for their good work. And I want to thank the banks. I mean, most of the banks actually, it's very, very few and pretty much unanimously who didn't step up. I think it's the bad banks and the ones who don't realize what they're doing and who have been calling the housing department in some cases and don't even know what properties they hold right now. And that's how bad this crisis is, folks. Many of the banks don't even understand. They have no idea, and they're calling the city of LA. Do you have a list, or do you have any knowledge of what property we own? So we can't steamroller over residents in the midst of that. But the banks who stepped up and said, you know, this does make sense, we can figure out a way to do this, I really appreciate that. And I do want to single those out, as well as folks from the real estate community and others who are not full of rhetoric, but actually looking at why this is important for us to do and come together in these times. If we can't do this piece, we're not going to be able to do a lot of pieces that at the national and local level we need to do to get ourselves out of this. We're at a 30-year unemployment high now, and it's not. And I don't think we've hit the bottom. I wish I could say that we had, but I don't think anybody rationally believes we've hit the bottom in this country. And so our ability at the local level, at the neighborhood level, to protect all these gains from the last couple decades of better economic justice and better conditions and stable communities, which at the end of the day is what Los Angeles City is about, this will be a great step forward. So I'm sure I'll have my support, but I urge my colleagues' support and thank them for their efforts in making sure that this gets through as well. Thanks.
When you mentioned 300 calls by the hotline, and then at the end of your presentation, you mentioned that with the monies we do have, we might only address 100 homes?
100 of the rental properties.
The rental properties. So the harsh reality is what the city can do at its optimum is to inform people how to protect themselves. But having very real relief from a dollar's point of view is very, very limited.
What the feeling is now is that the money, the $33 million that we will receive in February, we are placing ourselves in a position to receive first a recapture of funds from across the country and in the state that are not used. So I believe that we have placed us in the best position to recapture. The second thing is that it looks like there may be a second round of this program from the federal government sometime next year that is already being discussed.
It's not my intent to lessen the value of the work you're doing and your department or the city family in this effort, the great work that we are seeing unfolding coming from Councilman Garcetti's office in regards to legislation is significant. But I also think we need to provide that reality check to many of the folks and how we inform them of how they can protect themselves.
Well, you know, at the housing department, we do both the financing of affordable housing, but we also do all the implementation of rent stabilization or any notice provisions or code enforcement. So it's kind of all of our, you know, we're all in there together. What I guess I would say is that the greatest tools that a local government has are these types of regulations, the things that help you stem the tide and stop the problem from getting worse. Right. These are the things that the federal government will not legislate and perhaps shouldn't legislate. It is left to local leadership to act in this way. We have, for instance, last week you all approved, we're adding a component to the citywide tenant and landlord outreach and education program. That's why I want to increase the budget, because we're now going to have a component only on foreclosures, because it's obvious this is going to be with us for at least another 5 years.
And you're doing outreach to the owners, too.
Oh,
right?
No, absolutely, everybody.
Which was, just a point, sorry, Mr. Vice Chair, that was made before when you came here, that we're actually taking this proactive step with these lenders and others to let them know how they can get property managers. So we're not just saying the burden's on you, we're actually trying to assist.
We already met with a whole slew in the summer, and we are now starting next week, both with lenders and realtors, what the foreclosure program looks like. So this is an incredibly broad-based outreach program.
So on the most basic level, folks need to call either 311 or they call our offices or they call your department to figure out how they can defend themselves?
Yes, Councilman Reyes. In fact, in one of the, just to base on some of the comments that we've received, we have two recommendations that are coming before you on the NSP transmittal. One is to actually require a registration, as was indicated, for buyers of multifamily properties, the ones that we inspect, to notify the housing department when there has been a sale and a change of ownership within a month of the close of escrow, so that we in fact know who are the people who own the properties. Tenants can certainly find out from us about that. We can provide notification, and we can also act to deal with utility issues and other related issues. Another requirement that we are, another recommendation that we have is to have a posting on rent-stabilized properties, so that people are made aware of their responsibilities and rights, and also the contact information of the housing department, so that they can find out quickly who to call and where to look for their rights by having these postings, and those are coming before you.
I think what's significant is that, well, let me take a step back. Driving through my district, I see up on the telephone poles flyers that says foreclosure, save your home, call this number. Mm-hmm. The quality of that information, the type of information, reminds me of the predatory lending type practices that we saw in the late 80s and early 90s.
That's right.
Is there a way to help folks defend themselves? Because folks are desperate, and they see this number and they think it's going to help them, especially if they're not informed. There's a way to report these kinds of individuals and or entities that are posturing themselves in a manner that could be harmful to our citizenry?
I believe that there is, that may be not necessarily within the jurisdiction of the housing department, but it may be from the point of consumer fraud and things like that, that we would be happy to work with all of you and others that are experts in that we are not, to figure out how to do that. But we do feel that what is important is that we get this registration issue settled, because once LHD is informed, then we will notify the tenant, and that gives them the opportunity, right, to call the hotline to figure out all their options. And so we feel that the housing department in that sense is a fair broker. We want to just be the ones, make sure you know what your rights are. And we feel that it's appropriate at the time of foreclosure, because when something goes into default, it doesn't necessarily go into foreclosure, right? And it could go into default several times and be cured. So we think that when the foreclosure happens, they have 60-day notice anyway by state law, but this gives us the opportunity to get in and make sure that people have, know their rights. So it is coming back before you, but we would be happy to be pushed along even and entertain a motion today would be welcome.
Was that a hint? Okay. Let me, Councilmember, any comments? Okay, so.
Yeah, just one last thing to conclude. In terms of a sunset on this, I think I'd propose that we put this forward for a year, but that we have 6 months that we check back in, and that after that year we're able to renew for additional 6 months at a time. If times change for the better, would be the only reason. Of course, you can always come sooner, and we always say, wow, unemployment's down at 0%, and everybody can buy homes. But come forward to us. Obviously, that's not a mandate, but at least every 6 months we want to come back while we're in this crisis. But I would propose that we have a year so that we can get the data. And I appreciate some of the banks were asking that be 6 months. I don't think we can even see the impact in 6 months. But I would like a report back here in 6 months so we can assess where we're at. If things have changed, you have my word that we will look at things. But I think all of us know it's going to be longer than 6 months, unfortunately. So I would just move that forward as an amendment, that this have that sunset clause, but that we have the ability to renew that 6 months at a time for as long as we need this. So
okay.
Is that doable?
Yeah, I can certainly amend it to add a provision that it would sunset in 1 year, and during that year or at the end of the year, then the council would certainly have the option to extend it for 6 months, another year, or whatever. Right. I probably wouldn't put the report back within 6 months. I don't think that needs to be part of the ordinance. But
yeah, no, that wouldn't be the ordinance. That would just be an instruction from the committee.
I can come to council with an ordinance that contains a 1 year sunset
Absolutely.
provision.
Well, thank you.
Before we take an action, the ability to inform community, I believe at least in the districts where you have it, the most severe impacts, the non-traditional meeting places like churches and senior centers and where folks go on their daily routines. Do we have a strategy to provide that type of outlet and in the multilingual fashion?
In fact, the report that you all approved has within it that whoever it is that we contract with must be proficient not only in the type of outreach, but in all of the new forms of media, where libraries, where every place where it's happening, to get it across. So this is ideas that it's both modern but community based. I would say that eventually I will ask you at this table to provide some other help. The thing that the housing department does not have, we have a great heart, but we don't have a lot of money. So what I think I know I will come back and ask you for help is that, we should be on the backs of buses. We should be on those benches. We should be, right? We can't afford that, that, but we're going to need some help. We're in a crisis, and it is time to see who can help us get the word out to help alleviate some pain.
We'll do that. The motion you suggested is, can you please rephrase that?
We have two parts
two
of it.
actions? Okay.
Yes, and we're going to take this from the NSP for, transmittal that you've already seen, but here it is.
Okay.
I'll just read it off. Require buyers of multifamily properties to notify LAHD of the acquisition of the property with updated contact information within 30 days of close of escrow, and impose a penalty of $250 for failure to comply. Require landlords of property subject to the RSO to post a notice that the property is subject to the RSO in a form prescribed by LAHD. The notice shall provide information regarding the rent stabilization ordinance and information on how to contact LAHD, and require the notice to be posted in the lobby near the common mailbox or in a conspicuous location in or near a public entranceway, and impose a penalty of $250 per violation for repeated failure to comply.
Seeing that the chair has come back and fulfilled his seat, his destiny, I was hoping that Councilman Garcia, are you fine with the verbiage and the okay, great, Councilman?
Then, without objection, we'll adopt the city attorney's report and draft ordinance. Thank everybody.
Yeah,
Thank you.
And just for the record, as amended, with a 1 year sunset provision.
Which makes sense to kind of monitor it. Okay, great.
Mr. Chair.
All right.
Thank you all again for coming in, for those folks who came for this. Thank you.
Ms. Perry, you may want to wait a second.
No. I wanted to wrap back to item 1 really quickly. Just a motion for reconsideration on item 1.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Okay, so you want to reconsider item 1?
Just very quickly.
Okay. Without objection, then we will reconsider item 1.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Every year we scramble to maintain full funding levels for the homeless programs at San Julian and Gladys Parks, the James Wood Community Center, and Central City East Sanitation Program. These are areas in Central City East or the Skid Row community. In the past 2 years, the CRA has funded these programs due to consolidated plan budget reductions. And I just want to put on the record my request to ask the Chief Legislative Analyst's Office to work with the Community Redevelopment Agency on this issue and report back to the committee, say in 60 days, on the ability to keep these programs whole.
Okay,
That's all.
Without objection. That'll be the order where it relates to item 1. Now, we're going to go back to the regular agenda to item number 10. And this is a presentation on the Los Angeles grocery industry. We have, I think, at this point to discuss grocery industry trends and the role in the LA economy, Dr. Robert Rodino and Amanda Schaefer. If you could come forward. Good morning. Each panel will receive 8 minutes. That's all the time I got left. So please, Doctor.
good morning, and it's a pleasure to address members of the City Council. Thank you for this opportunity. Some time ago, I was asked to prepare a report by the CRA on the grocery industry and its impact on the Los Angeles economy. And what I will share with you today are some of the highlights of that report, necessarily in a brief and qualitative manner, but all the details and quantitative documentation is in the report that you have access to. I'd like to cover 5 topics in looking at the grocery industry: growth, change, the industry organization, profitability, and community impact. And I understand there's also going to be a panel delving more deeply into community impact. Growth, first off, nationally and locally, the industry is expected to continue to grow based on population growth, both in the country as a whole as well as in the Los Angeles area. It is expected to grow more rapidly in the Los Angeles area population because that's the nature of who we are, and therefore we would expect the grocery industry to grow in coordination with the population. If the same ratio of supermarkets and grocery stores to population were to be maintained, we have right now about 855 supermarkets in the city of LA, and the city of LA is due to grow to about 10% over the next 10 years, which means it's going to add about 400,000 people. If you work that through, that would mean we would need another 85 supermarkets to maintain that relationship. That's a significant growth, and the question is, where will they go? And we may not get to 85, and there's some factors that I'll discuss in a moment. If we do need that many, the question is, where are they? Where can they go? Many of them have to go into the inner cities where there are very few supermarkets now because of the nature of competition. Many of them will have to go into multi-level developments like the Ralphs in downtown, and many will have to go into mixed-use developments just because of the availability of land. So one factor in aiding what we want to do is to get more supermarkets into inner cities is the need for locations. In the short run, the lower cost, more price-sensitive supermarkets are expected to do better than the higher cost. That means the Vons and Food for Less will probably do better than the Gelsons and Bristol Farms because of the nature of our economy over the long run, over the short run. Over the long run, it remains to be seen. Change. I'd like to talk about briefly format and offerings. The format is changing in 2 directions, plus there's a third way in which format is changing that's not really a change in format. One direction you've seen before, you've seen both of them actually, the prevalence and growth of large superstores, the Walmart superstore type of thing, 200,000 square feet. We've seen a lot of resistance throughout the state and throughout the country to that for a variety of reasons: political resistance, that has been in existence here in Los Angeles and Inglewood, et cetera, but we've seen the growth of those superstores in places like Rosemead and other parts of Los Angeles County. We also see developers shying away from bringing in a superstore because of the political and community resistance that they've gotten. They figure they don't need any more headaches than they already have. And thirdly, there is a difficulty in finding sites in urban areas. A 200,000 square foot superstore needs about 10 acres of land just for itself for parking. That's very difficult to find. So we're seeing a counter trend, the growth of smaller, quote unquote, urban friendly stores of about 15,000 square feet. Tesco's Fresh and Easy is the prime example. Vons is also trying to do one in Long Beach as an experiment. Those are about 15,000 square feet. The questions there are, do they offer a sufficient number of products, and are they financially feasible? That remains to be seen. It's open issues right now. And the third direction in which formats are changing, it's not really a change in format, is the growth of green technology in store design and development. I think we welcome that. Walmart has been promoting that, I think possibly to counter some of the negative publicity they've been getting, but nevertheless, it's a good trend. In the offerings area, there's three directions changing at once. We're seeing an increase in prepared meals for convenience to compete with restaurants and takeout food. We're seeing an increase in the use of store brands to compete on price. And we're seeing an increase in the promotion of organic products, a trend that we all welcome. And the third area is in industry organization. We're seeing a continued, and we expect to see a continued consolidation of the grocery industry nationwide, with mergers and acquisitions occurring as they have occurred for many, many decades. But I think possibly we'll see more of that happen with the major chains acquiring some of the ethnic-oriented chains to serve those markets that they're not serving well right now. You saw yesterday, in yesterday's Times, the breakdown of the demographics of LA County, the high growth of Latino and Asian population in particular, and the diffusion of those two populations into areas that are not uniquely one or the other now, which tells us something else that I'll get into in a moment. We also will probably see, because of the consolidation, fewer stores within the growth projections that I talked about, accounting for larger share of sales. We've seen that happen over several decades, and I expect that to continue. Excuse me. And we'll see the growth of the ethnic-oriented markets serving Southern California. And I think you'll see those markets diversifying a bit, so that what was a Latino market can now also serve some Asian consumers, and vice versa, because of the diffusion of the different ethnic groups in one community. Profitability, a very important issue. It's a complex issue, and you need to understand the dynamics of the accounting of how the supermarkets put out the information. They promote that they have low margins on profit, and they do if you measure the margins the way they do. When they talk about net earnings as compared to sales, that ratio is about 1 to 3%. That's legitimate. However, this is what's going on. If I buy a product for $10 and sell it to you for $11, I can claim that I've made $1 on 10 if I've actually spent the $10. But if you've given me your $11 before I purchased the 10, and I purchased the product with 10 of your $11, I haven't invested anything, except the process of setting up the ability to do that. That's exactly what happens in the predominant case with supermarkets, where they have a lag time between when they have to pay for the goods purchased from the producer and sell it to the consumer, so that their margin is not exactly what they're saying it is. And so you need to look at several other factors. You need to look at net earnings as a percentage of gross profit, and that's in the 6 to 14% range. And then even more importantly, you need to look at return on equity, which is means their net earnings and compared to what they have to invest to earn those net earnings, net return on equity. And that's in the range of 7 to 18%. And that's a competitive range of return on equity given our marketplace in general. So, and my report describes this in details, and I'll be happy to discuss it further with you. The last area I want to refer to is community impact of supermarkets. And I want to talk about location and labor. And location, we all know this, the convenience to residents of having a supermarket within a short walk or driving distance. is very important. It provides a sense of community to the residents that they live someplace that has value and quality. And it provides property value increase for the commercial properties and for the residential properties within that trade area. Labor is important because, first of all, it provides income to workers. An increase, and this is important, an increase in 20% of wages to the laboring class of supermarket employment. That's those that are unionized, basically, the food preparation workers, the sales clerks, the stock clerks, etc. An increase in 20% of their wages and an increase in 50% of fringe benefits can be paid for by an increase in prices of 2.4%. Now, we don't necessarily want to increase prices, particularly right now, but just think about that for a minute. That means a $100 shopping cart of groceries would then cost $102.40. Not a big price differential, but a very significant income differential and wage benefit differential for the workers. And if you consider that the increase in wages and benefits can result in increased worker morale, lower turnover, and lower absenteeism, it's possible that a good portion of that increased price might be paid for by savings in the whole labor issue. So that's an important thing. On community, that increase in income and in wage benefits could result in as much as about $62 million per year to the redevelopment area communities that we looked at. Now, that's a significant amount. The assumptions that had to be made to come up with that figure are in my report, but that means that between direct impact for the laborers and direct impact for the communities, these increases that can be paid for modestly is very significant. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, now, but Amanda, before, I think Mr. Reyes has a quick question for the doctor, and then we'll go to you.
What the discretion in terms of quality of product, quality of the poultry, of the vegetables, of the things that the families need, how does that play into that decision making when you're speaking to the markets actually have time to pay for their products? I mean, it happens too many times, and in my experience, real experiences with my family, where we'll go Food for Less and buy chicken, and we bring it home, and it's spoiled.
Mm-hmm.
It smells bad.
Mm-hmm.
You get the bread,
Mm-hmm.
it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you go to Pasadena, South Pasadena, it's always fresh.
Right.
I mean, how is it that you start, I mean, where does that lie, that discretion?
What I think is happening is the supermarkets are hedging their bets in lower income areas where it does cost more to operate. They're trying to save money in places that they shouldn't be saving money, because no one should be promoting poor quality products. It's not specifically reflected in the dollars and cents that I've calculated. I haven't made provisions for lower cost products to be purchased or high cost products. I've just taken the averages across the board.
But there's a pattern there.
There is definitely a pattern that should not be accepted by the consumer. That's why they're not accepted in Pasadena.
Okay, Amanda?
Good morning. My name is Amanda Schaefer. I work at the Urban and Environmental Policy Institute at Occidental College. And it's a pleasure to be here today to talk to you about an issue that UEPI feels like is a very integral part of creating a city that is just and healthy for people and the environment. We've just heard some findings about some worrisome trends and resulting divides that exist in LA's grocery industry. And you know, the problem of food deserts in Los Angeles is not a new one. As far back as the 60s, residents of South LA were asking for more supermarkets. In the 80s, Mayor Bradley insisted that a boys' market be opened in South LA. And in the 90s, we heard promises about 32 new stores that were going to be built, and those promises were never fully realized. This term, food desert, refers to an area where healthy, affordable food is not readily available to the people who live there. But it's about more than that. The broad-based consequences of not having supermarkets in these neighborhoods have an impact on health, on job standards, on the environment, and we truly have a situation where we have two different cities that are existing in terms of food access issues. The grocery industry is a $31 billion industry that includes 2,340 stores, and over the past 2 years, the three largest chains, Ralph's, Vons, and Albertsons, have grown steadily. despite the labor dispute, despite the declining economy and increasing food prices. These chains have also continued to expand and upgrade many existing stores, and in response to old players like Walmart and new players like Tesco, they're contemplating developing these smaller format store lines that we've heard about. But unfortunately, not all communities are benefiting from these improvements and investments. Tesco promised to open stores in food deserts when they came. Of the nearly 100 stores they've opened so far in Southern California, we've yet to really see them tackle the food desert issue that they promised to deal with. And yeah.
I have a question.
Just for your edification, because you may not know this, we're currently under construction at Adams and Central with a 15,000 square foot Fresh and Easy on the ground floor with 85 units of mixed income housing on top.
Thank you. I am aware of that, but it hasn't opened yet, and they've opened all these other stores.
Well, they're under construction right
Yes,
now.
I do realize
Just so that
I
want to be factual about this so that people understand.
Absolutely, yes. But it's not clear that Tesco or any of the major chains will be opening a large number of these new small format stores in the neighborhoods that need them the most. The cycle of promises with no action is consistent with the decades-long abandonment in South LA, East LA, the Northeast San Fernando Valley. And the result is that some communities just don't have access to liquor stores. Don't have access to healthy food and end up doing all of their shopping at liquor stores.
Let's take a deep pause right
Thank
there. We need to correct that one there.
They end up doing their shopping at liquor stores and eating at fast food restaurants. Unless they're lucky enough to own a car or live along a convenient bus route that can take them to another neighborhood to do their shopping. The desertion of low-income communities has continued despite evidence that hundreds of millions of dollars leak from the communities every year because residents are having to shop in other neighborhoods and even other cities for their food. There are a number of factors that have led to this supermarket abandonment, and the ongoing consolidation of the industry hasn't helped, but the lack of accountability and ingrained but invalid principles that have guided the siting of new store locations demonstrate an apparent lack of will, in our opinion, in the leadership of the major chains to address the food desert problem. UEPI has been watching this issue for over a decade, and we believe that left alone, the chains won't act any differently in the future. And so that's why we think it's really important that there be greater policy involvement in the siting of supermarkets.
Great, thank you. Are there any other presentations? Yes, you have.
Two more panels.
Okay, we have, thank you very much. Any questions, my colleagues, on this? Okay. We do have another panel, I believe, the gross industry operations impact LA communities. Who's left here? Dr. Richard Baker, Cliff Goldstein, and I believe it's Elliot Petty. Come on up. We're going to have to put you on the quick speed because we got about maybe 7-8 minutes left before council begins. So I want to make sure you're all cognizant of our limitations here. Please start.
Okay, good morning. Thank you for letting me speak today. I'm Dr. Richard Baker, Dean of College of Medicine, Charleston University, and Associate Dean of College of Medicine at UCLA and Director of Center for Health Services Research. I'm speaking today for having been privileged for serving on the Alliance for Health and Responsible Grocery Stores Blue Ribbon Commission. I joined this commission panel today to implore the committee and the Los Angeles City Council to close the grocery gap in the city. Our Blue Ribbon Commission recently released a report outlining the depths of the grocery divide in the city, and you've heard it all today. The major grocery chains have systematically abandoned low-income communities in South LA, East LA, and Northeast San Fernando Valley. And the results are hundreds of thousands of children and adults are without healthy food options. They're left with fast food, discount marks, and liquor stores, and their bodies, their health, and the community's well-being are in peril as a result. The statistics and data which I trust you've heard and will hear are staggering. Chronic diet-related illnesses in these food deserts are through the roof. We see in our hospitals an overwhelming numbers of people of color with heart disease, diabetes, and high blood pressure. For example, these communities of color, the rates of diabetes are 2 to 3 times the national average, and rates of complications from diabetes are such as blindness, amputations, heart attacks, strokes, are twice again higher. And also now we're seeing diagnoses as occurring much earlier than before. Diagnoses for diabetes are now occurring in the early 30s. This is leading to premature deaths. For example, African American males in this state today, almost 50% of them die before the age of 65. And the rates of childhood obesity in these communities is just epidemic. These health realities have serious consequences on our public health system, serious stresses, and we can't afford to ignore it any longer. We need healthy food options in these food desert communities. Moreover, we need healthy investment in these communities. That means generating healthy food options so that residents and their kids have access without driving to Santa Monica, as well as good jobs so that these communities are feeling the economic stimulus that will allow them to afford the healthy food options. Make no mistake, the stakes are very high. The stress on our already overwhelmed health system of having generation after generation of low-income residents suffering from the consequences of a failed food system is daunting and continues to grow. Our Blue Ribbon Commission is advocating for extremely ambitious policy rivaling how we might approach a fiscal emergency. At all levels of government, we're talking of bailouts, and while there's unquestionably necessary to have these bailouts, we also need a physical health bailout. We need the city to get heavily involved in how this industry operates in Los Angeles. The potential costs in human lives and the cost of the city are too vast not to get involved. Thank you.
Thank you. Cliff?
Good morning, council members. My name is Cliff Goldstein, and I speak to you today as a member of a Blue Ribbon Commission convened over 2 years ago by the Alliance for Healthy and Responsible Grocery Stores, and as a senior partner of the J.H. Snyder Company. As you've already heard today, and will be here repeated, and as you likely knew before you started this morning, there are vast deserts, food deserts in this city, and they are worsening. You know, I know personally that while most low-income neighborhoods in the city have no full-service grocery stores, Vaughn's alone operates 3 within approximately a mile of my home. I know in the Marina Del Rey area, within 2 blocks, there are 4 full-service grocery stores and 2 other ones that are planning to try to open stores there. As I mentioned, I'm a senior partner of the J. Snyder Company, and I'm a real estate developer. And I've helped open many grocery stores in the Los Angeles area. And the explanation that I often hear from the industry for the city's grocery divide is that it's difficult to ensure solid profits in quote certain communities. Based upon our hearings, however, and countless studies at this point, the dirty little secret seems to be that what is really taking place here is discrimination. The fact is that hundreds of millions of dollars are leaving these communities each year to shop at major grocery chains in other areas. Indeed, it's safe to assume that many of these millions are actually leaving Los Angeles to cities like Santa Monica and Culver City or other communities with major chain stores. This not only debunks the notion that you can't make money in these communities, I mean, the money is there, but it also flies in the face of logic. Here's the sad irony. As our city faces enormous economic challenges, and as we continue to pour money into low-income communities to address inequities and chronic poverty, we may actually be contributing to this problem by watching idly as hundreds of millions of dollars simultaneously exit these communities. As a developer who has developed millions of square feet of retail, I can tell you that the #1 co-tenant that numerous retailers from bookstores to clothing stores and our retail centers ask for are grocery stores. Each new grocery store that's built in a community, and especially in an underserved community, will attract all kinds of new businesses. Businesses to these areas are important. Economic vitality that is critical to these communities' well-being and survival. As a businessman, a taxpayer, and a member of this Blue Ribbon Commission, it is very disheartening and disturbing to me to learn this truth. As we've heard today, and you'll continue to hear, ranging from the impact on physical and economic health to the effects on public education, I believe this city can no longer afford to watch passively as the grocery industry balkanizes our community. And having witnessed the process personally, very closely for quite a few years, I'm convinced that a piecemeal effort won't get it done. Therefore, consistent with the report of our commission released in May, we need the city government to step in and get aggressively and strategically involved. We need good policy. So we call on this committee, the city council, and our city leaders to employ their best thinking and identify a way forward that balances incentives with accountability and profits with fairness. We need a public policy that addresses our city's well-being as a whole, and we will stand with you in this process. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, excuse me, and to any of the other speakers, I just have to get down to start the council meeting, but my apologies.
I'll try to be brief. Good morning. My name is Elliot Petty. I'm with the LA Alliance for New Economy and representing the Alliance for Healthy and Responsible Grocery Stores, the coalition today. We've heard at length about the grocery divide plaguing our city. You've heard about the community health implications of this divide. You've also heard about the job quality disparities plaguing these communities. We've also found that grocery workers in low-income communities make on average $7,000 less per year than workers in more affluent communities of Los Angeles. And this deprives these same communities of the economic stimulus that they so desperately need. And you've heard about how this plays itself out as LA residents and millions of dollars leave those communities in search of healthy food options. In some, there's a justice issue and a policy issue. We cannot allow or ignore the plight of low-income communities and the isolation that is being perpetuated by the abandonment of major grocery stores chains. We believe this is a practical policy issue, and this is about community health. We need the LA City Council to engage in this issue aggressively and with broad strokes. We need communities to have a voice in the solution, and therefore we call on the council to design and pass a policy that will ensure a just and economically sound food system in our city.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. You know, Elliot, this is more than just an area of concern. So what I will probably do is, in all fairness to you and the presenters or the individuals from the various panels, we will probably do another hearing after the holiday where that will be the only thing that is on the agenda. Because, like I said, this is a very serious issue. And, you know, at the time that I had to listen to some of the speakers today, I've already learned a lot. So it's something that I don't know the answer. I don't know where we go with this yet, but I think we will find that direction when we have more communication and we get more information out there. So I want to thank everybody who came today and presented. I'll turn it over to you in a second. And I also want to thank the individuals. I know there was another panel that was going to speak, but in the interest of time, we had to eliminate that panel. So I want to thank them as well. And again, make the commitment for us, you know, after the first of the year to have another hearing, one where we can have the ability to really ask questions and have a good back and forth. I just think it's important. The more the people know about the situation, I think then it makes it easier for us to try to make whatever corrections need to be made. And with that, Mr. Reyes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do believe this could be viewed from different perspectives. This committee, under the leadership of Councilman Wesson, is obviously focused on the social and economic development policy level in terms of how we address these concerns. I'd like to invite the folks who are working on this issue to focus just on the land use side of this. That's something that I could chair on the Planning, Land Use, and Management Committee, because the land use element is very specific to how we conduct our land use patterns. And that's a very separate and different approach to how we look at this notion of leveraging city discretion and trying to educate folks as to the income density that does exist in our respective neighborhoods. We might have small wallets, but we have a lot of them. and that's something that should be respected. So, again, I'd like to continue working this, but I'd like to invite the groups here to get in touch with Guadalupe Duran Medina from my office. We can set up a time after to discuss just the land use element of this.
Well, and I'm glad Mr. Reyes brought that up, because that is very important. And what I see here is an opportunity to move down two paths where it relates to this. So I think there's a double bite at the apple here if you heard what Mr. Reyes said and quickly make some adjustments. Anyway, with that said, is there any more business, Ms. Barclay, before this committee?
No, sir.
Then this committee's adjourned. Thank everyone. Thank you.